Welcome to the Deep Dive. We sift through the sources so you get the crucial insights. Today we're tackling a threat that's, well, been lurking in the background but recently made some tragic headlines. Hantavirus. Yeah, just think about early 2025, that small town, Mammoth Lakes in California. A really unusual and heartbreaking cluster, 3 fatal hantavirus cases. And that came after a spike in Arizona in the first half of 2024. 7 cases of HPS, Hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, and sadly, 4 deaths there. Plus, globally, it's an ongoing thing in parts of Asia, South America. For a lot of people, hantavirus is maybe just a name they've vaguely heard, an unseen threat, really. But these recent events, they've definitely put it under the spotlight. So our mission here is simple: give you the essential rundown on hantaviruses. We'll look at the science, how it jumps from rodents to people, the 2 main ways it makes us sick, where it pops up around the world, why we're seeing these outbreaks now, and critically, how to prevent it. Plus, what's happening with treatments and vaccines. The goal is really just to arm you with the facts, help you stay informed, stay safe. So let's dive in. What exactly are these hantaviruses?
Right. Well, hantaviruses are actually a whole family of viruses. You find them all over the world, and their main carriers, their hosts, are rodents. We generally split them into 2 big groups. There are the old world hantaviruses, think Europe, Asia, Africa, and then the New World ones, which are here in the Americas. And this distinction is really important because even though they're related, they cause quite different kinds of illnesses in humans.
And I read they're surprisingly tough little things, these viruses, for something microscopic.
Oh, absolutely. They are remarkably resilient. We're talking about viruses that can stay infectious, potentially for over a week in cool, dry spots, maybe even longer, like 10 days or more at room temperature, especially if they're protected in dried rodent droppings or urine. That hardiness, that's a huge factor in how easily they can spread in the environment.
And the carriers, the rodents, they often don't even look sick themselves, right? How does that work?
Yeah, that's one of the fascinating and frankly dangerous things about them. Each specific type of hantavirus tends to stick with a particular rodent species. The virus lives in the rodent but doesn't usually cause disease in the rodent. So these infected rodents, they just go about their lives, shedding the virus in their pee, their droppings, their saliva. And because they seem perfectly healthy, they're really efficient at spreading the virus around their habitat. For instance, the Cynombrella virus, the one causing hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, or HPS, here in North America. Its main host is the deer mouse, which is super common. Then over in Asia, you have the Hantavirus causing a severe disease called hemorrhagic fever with renal syndrome, or HFRS. That's often carried by the striped field mouse. And the sole virus, which causes a milder HFRS. That one's carried by common rats, even in cities sometimes. And down in South America, the Andes virus, which is particularly nasty, its host is the long-tailed pygmy rice rat. So yeah, healthy-looking rodents acting as silent spreaders.
Okay, so if the rodents aren't obviously sick, how does it make that jump? How do we get it?
The number one way, by far, is breathing it in. So imagine you're cleaning out, say, a dusty shed, maybe an old cabin that's been closed up, or even just an attic where mice have been. If there are dry droppings, urine, or saliva from infected rodents, and you stir up that dust, maybe by sweeping or using a regular vacuum cleaner, tiny virus particles can get kicked up into the air, aerosolized.
Ah, so you breathe in that contaminated dust.
Exactly. Inhaling those airborne particles is the main risk. Now, there are less common ways, too, like if you touch a contaminated surface and then touch your eyes, nose, or mouth, or, very rarely, through a bite from an infected rodent. People whose jobs or hobbies put them in rodent habitats more often think farmers, forestry workers, campers, even some construction workers that are naturally at higher risk.
Right. And just to be super clear, this isn't something spread by bugs like ticks or mosquitoes.
Correct. That's a crucial point. Hantaviruses are not transmitted by arthropods. It's all about exposure to infected rodents or their contaminated environments.
Makes sense. Okay, what about person-to-person spread? If someone gets sick and they give it to me?
Generally, for the types of hantaviruses we see in the Americas causing HPS, the answer is no. Human-to-human transmission is considered extremely rare, almost non-existent. You really can't catch HPS just by caring for someone who has it or being near them if they cough.
Okay, that's reassuring for healthcare workers and families.
It is. However, there is one significant exception we need to mention. That's the Andes virus, found primarily in South America, particularly Argentina and Chile. There has been documented evidence starting back in the 90s that the Andes virus can occasionally spread between people who are in very close, prolonged contact, like household members or sometimes healthcare providers if precautions aren't strict. But even with Andes virus, it's much, much less efficient at spreading between humans than it is spreading from rodents to humans. So outside of that specific Andes virus situation, these infections are fundamentally zoonotic. You get them from animals, from the environment, not typically from other people.
Got it. Okay, so these hantaviruses, they cause two main types of illness, two syndromes, and they sound quite different in how they attack the body. It usually starts after maybe 1 to even 8 weeks incubation, which is a long window, with symptoms that feel a lot like the flu. Doctors call it a prodrome. Fever, tiredness, muscle aches all over, headache, chills, maybe feeling sick to your stomach. The trouble is those symptoms are so vague, right? Could be anything. Makes it really hard to catch early.
Exactly. Very nonspecific early on. Then, depending on whether it's a New World or Old World virus, it diverges. Let's talk about hantavirus pulmonary syndrome first, HPS. This is the one we see in the Americas, caused by viruses like Sinombe. After that initial flu-like phase, usually within about 4 to 10 days, things can go downhill very, very quickly. Patients develop severe problems with their lungs and heart. Essentially, the virus damages the tiny blood vessels, the capillaries, in the lungs. This makes them leaky, and fluid floods into the air sacs. That's called pulmonary edema.
So like drowning from the inside.
It can feel like that for the patient, yes. It leads to a really bad cough, extreme shortness of breath. Breathing gets very fast and shallow. It can progress rapidly to acute respiratory distress syndrome, ARDS. And it's not just the lungs. HPS often hits the heart too, weakening its ability to pump blood effectively, which can lead to circulatory collapse or shock.
Wow. That sounds incredibly dangerous. What are the survival chances?
HPS is extremely serious. The case fatality rate on average in the U.S. is around 35 to 40%. And in some specific outbreaks, it's been even higher, pushing 50, even 60%. It's a very deadly disease.
That's staggering.
It is. The good news, if there is any, is that survivors usually clear the virus completely. They don't typically develop chronic infections. Diagnosis relies heavily on doctors suspecting it, especially if someone has sudden, severe respiratory failure and a history of potential rodent exposure. Then, specific lab tests, blood tests looking for antibodies or PCR tests for the virus itself are needed for confirmation, often coordinated with state labs or the CDC.
Okay, so that's HPS in the Americas. What about the other main illness, the one from the old world viruses?
Right, that's hemorrhagic fever with renal syndrome, or HFRS, caused by viruses like Hantavirus, Dobrava, Sol, Pumala, found in Asia and Europe primarily. With HFRS, after that initial flu-like prodrome, the main target shifts. It really goes after the kidneys. Patients can develop acute kidney injury, sometimes leading to outright kidney failure. Their urine output can drop dramatically, they retain fluid, and, as the name suggests, it can cause hemorrhagic problems, bleeding. This might show up as tiny pinpoint spots on the skin, called petechiae, or more serious internal bleeding. Blood platelet counts often drop dangerously low. Patients might also complain of really intense back pain, abdominal pain, maybe facial flushing.
Hemorrhagic fever and kidney failure. That sounds rough too. Is it as deadly as HPS?
The severity of HFRS really depends on the specific virus strain involved. The Hantavirus and Dobrava viruses, often seen in Asia and parts of Eastern Europe, they can cause severe HFRS with mortality rates somewhere in the range of 5 to 15%.
Still very serious, but maybe not quite the 40% average of HPS.
Generally, yes, though 15% is still extremely high for an infectious disease. But then you have the Sol virus, carried by rats worldwide, and the Pumala virus, common in bank voles in Europe. These usually cause milder forms of HFRS. Mortality rates for those are much lower, typically 1% or even less. But milder is relative. Even Pumala infections, sometimes called nephropathia epidemica, can still land people in the hospital, sometimes needing dialysis for temporary kidney failure. Diagnosis is similar: lab tests, blood work, PCR, and these tests tend to be more available in countries where HFRS is common, like in Asia. But again, just like HPS, these are acute illnesses. People recover, they clear the virus, they don't become chronic carriers.
Okay, so we have these two distinct diseases, HPS in the Americas, HFRS in the old world. Where exactly are we seeing cases? And what's been happening recently? You mentioned those cases in California and Arizona. We know hantavirus cases overall are rare, but they do pop up globally, basically wherever their specific rodent hosts live. Here in the U.S. and North America, HPS is the main concern. It really came onto the radar in 1993, that outbreak in the Four Corners region, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah. That's when Sinombe virus was discovered. Since then, the U.S. typically sees, maybe around 30 reported cases a year on average? Something like that. And it's heavily weighted towards the west, right? Like 94% of cases are west of the Mississippi, usually peaking in spring and summer.
That's right. And looking at just the last couple of years, 2023 through early 2025, there have been some concerning clusters. You mentioned Arizona's spike in the first half of 2024, 7 HPS cases, 4 fatal. That was considered one of the largest recent U.S. outbreaks. And then Mono County, California, in the eastern Sierras, seeing 3 deaths in early 2025 from HPS in one small town. That was really alarming. Reports linked it to a boom in the deer mouse population after maybe a mild winter or favorable conditions.
And you said something interesting. The victims didn't necessarily do obviously risky things like cleaning out a cabin.
Yeah, that was a notable point in some reports. It suggested that maybe when the rodent population gets so dense and the amount of virus in the environment is really high, perhaps even more casual exposure could be enough. Like just having mice actively inside your home or workplace, their movement potentially stirring up enough virus particles over time. It's a worrying thought. New Mexico also continues to see cases consistently, 7 in 2023, 6 in 2024, and already 2 reported by early 2025.
Yeah, those numbers might sound small compared to, say, the flu, but each case is like a little warning signal, isn't it?
Yeah.
A canary in the coal mine, showing the virus is active in the local rodent population.
Precisely. It signals heightened risk in that area. Now, moving south into Central and South America, HPS is also the main form of the disease there, caused by a range of different New World hantaviruses. Countries like Argentina, Chile, Bolivia, Brazil see cases, again, often linked to rural or forested areas. And we have to come back to the Andes virus in Argentina and Chile. It's really the standout for being the only hantavirus known to have that occasional person-to-person transmission capability. We saw evidence back in '96 in Patagonia, and there were reports of new cases in Chile and Argentina again in early 2024, so it's definitely still circulating.
Okay, shifting across the globe now. What about Asia? You said that's more HFRS territory.
Oh, absolutely. If you want to talk volume, historically, Asia and particularly China was the global hotspot for HFRS. China used to report tens of thousands of cases annually. I mean, figures from 2004 to 2019 showed over 210,000 cases and nearly 2,000 deaths in that period alone.
Wow, it's a huge number.
It was. But here's a major public health success story. China implemented widespread domestic vaccination programs, mainly using inactivated HFRS vaccines, alongside much better rodent control measures, and the impact has been dramatic. Incidence and mortality have plummeted. HFRS deaths in China are now typically below 1%. It's a massive improvement. South Korea still reports several hundred HFRS cases each year, and you also see it in parts of Russia and Central Asia. But overall, in 2024, HFRS in Asia seem to be more of an ongoing managed problem rather than seeing huge new outbreaks, thanks largely to those control efforts.
That's good news. And Europe, also
Turkey.
HFRS, but maybe different.
Yes, Europe mainly sees a milder form of HFRS, often called Nephropathia epidemica. It's caused by the Pumala virus, which is carried by the bankvole, a very common rodent there. You see thousands of cases reported annually in countries like Finland, Sweden, Germany, Belgium, France. But thankfully, the fatality rate is very low, usually well under 1%. There is a more severe type, caused by the Dubrava virus, found more in the Balkan region, like Serbia and Slovenia.
And didn't you mention something about pet rats earlier? Even in cities.
Ah, yes, the sole virus connection. So sole virus, carried by common brown rats, Rattus norvegicus, can cause a mild to moderate HFRS. And because these rats live globally, including in cities, you occasionally get human cases linked to them. What's quirky is that sometimes pet rats, fancy rats derived from 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 rats derived